Hi, everybody. This is Joe Firestone, and it's 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. And my guest for tonight is John Michael Williams, who prefers to be called J.M. Williams. So for the rest of the night, I'll be referring to J.M. Okay, and he's running in the California 22nd District. And he's the only person in the race who is running as an independent. Okay, and I believe there are 7 people running, including yourself, JM.
Yes, there are 7 people running in my race. There are 3 Democrats, a Republican, of course, which is Devin Nunes. We have an American Solidarity candidate who's going to appear on the ballot as an independent, but he is not an independent. He is a member of an American Solidarity Party, and we have a Libertarian. So there are 6 party candidates in the race. I'm the only true independent. That's no party preference.
Okay, so it's a fascinating race. Okay, and I'd like to start off the program with you giving us some more background on the race and the issues that are involved, and also a little more on the kind of candidates that you are running against.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually entered the race on January 3rd. So I was a little bit behind in entering the race, I guess you could say. My logic behind entering the race on the 3rd was I didn't think people generally got into a race a year before they were planning on taking office. And so I thought getting in January 3rd, I was actually early. And so as I began to do the research and I began to find out about the other candidates, I kind of got a feel for each of them. And each of them, you know, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. We all have our strengths and our opportunities that we can work on. But as I told my supporters, I wouldn't have entered the race if I didn't feel that any of them could unseat Devin Nunes. And kind of the feel that I've gotten from each one, I mean, the Democrats have all been bought out. They're all taking corporate donations, and that's from opensecrets.org. That's not my own opinion. That's just a fact. And that's the FEC that has indicated they've all taken donations. And we are the only candidates that said we weren't going to take any corporate funds from the beginning. We said we weren't going to take corporate donations. We weren't going to take money from people over a certain net worth. We have since changed that. Now it's no millionaires. So if you're a millionaire, we're not taking money from you. And we've also made the determination we're not taking money from corporations over a certain size or their PACs. And so I entered the race as a Democrat originally. I was originally a Democrat. And then as I began to see kind of the dynamic of how the Democratic Party works and how it's become, it became very clear to me that there was no place for me in the Democratic Party. And, you know, the Democrats, they talk a big game about being for, you know, LGBT plus rights and for this minority community and that minority community. And I'm not an identity politics person. I think identity politics are destructive. But when we come down to it, the Democrats are real good about talking about the communities that they support. But here they have a young, openly gay Black person that says they want to run. And I was basically discouraged. I was pushed aside and told, look, you're not good enough. Without them even knowing me. They didn't even bother to do the research and figure out what kind of things I've been involved in, what kind of background I have. They just said you're not good enough from the beginning, and that's how it was. And my staff will tell you the same thing. We were told automatically that we were not viable.
Well, we're going to see tonight that you are good enough.
I hope so.
No problem about that, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so did you have any comments about what some of the other candidates, okay, are advocating for?
Yeah, so I can tell you this. The other candidates are interesting because I think there's a lot of deceptive language on some of the part of the other candidates. For instance, one of the candidates, Bobby Bliatow, is a healthcare executive. He's a CEO of a healthcare company, and he is a millionaire. I mean, he's already lent his campaign $75,000. So, I mean, that's drops in the buckets for him, I think. And he basically has said he's for Medicare-like plans for all. I don't know about everybody else, but to me, Medicare-like plans for all is just regular health insurance. That's not Medicare for all, where everyone is covered. There's nobody that's left out. That's a deceptive way of trying to pretend like you're for a progressive platform when really you're not.
If it was for HR 76 or something like it, you would
Yes.
have said that.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting that, sorry, I'm closing this window real quick. It's actually interesting that you ask about that. What you're speaking of is SB 562, and that is California's bill to call for Medicare for all. And I actually was the only candidate out of 7 candidates. The libertarian in our race has made very clear that he's not for Medicare for all. That's fine. That's his principles. He's standing by his principles. I can understand that. So let's narrow it down. Out of the 4 candidates who said that they're for Medicare for all, only I was there. I was the only one who went to the hearing for SB 562. I went in Sacramento. The other candidates didn't really have an excuse. They paid for our transportation, they paid for our food, they paid for our entry into the assembly meeting or whatever. So there was really no reason for none of the other candidates to go, or at least in the proxy to go there for them to overhear what I heard. And so I think it's interesting because it goes back to what I said before. It's one thing to say you're for Medicare for all. It's a completely different thing to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and show up when it counts. And so we've got a lot of these Democrats trying to pretend like they're for Medicare for all, and they're really not. And Bobby's an example of that. Andrew's not for Medicare for all. He's made very clear that he doesn't believe in Medicare for all. Rico, I believe, says he's for Medicare for all, but where was he at the hearing? He wasn't there at the hearing. He didn't go to hear SB 562. He hasn't been passing out signs and knocking on doors and doing videos about it and talking about it. So I try to judge people by their actions, not their words.
Okay, I try to judge them that way too, but I also try to judge them on their platforms and
Yeah.
what they say they are committed to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you mentioned SB 562, and that's the California bill.
Yes.
Okay, but unless I've got this wrong, which I may, okay, I went to your website and read extensively. You are running.
HR 652, I think it is.
No. If you're running for Congress, okay, for U.S. Congress,
Yes.
Is what I understood from your Facebook page.
Right.
Then the relevant bill is HR 676.
Right.
That bill was originally introduced, I believe, back in, I forget, it was either 2002 or 2004 by John
Conyer.
Conyers, and he has reintroduced it with refinements in every Congress since then. And it has been a very good bill, actually, from the beginning. It was already excellent by 2009, okay, when he introduced it then. And it's been excellent each time that he has reintroduced it.
Right.
And the last version that was reintroduced in 2017 was really excellent. And when John Conyers had to retire due to the sex scandals recently, that bill was taken over in Congress by Keith Ellison. So Keith Ellison is now the main sponsor of the bill.
Right.
He's pushing in the House. In my view, that bill is a better bill in many ways than the Bernie Sanders bill, okay, which is in the Senate. And the reason why I think so is because the Bernie Sanders bill phases in the Medicare for All program. It's not fully phased in until the
Right.
fourth year. But we have now something like 35,000 fatalities per year due to lack of insurance. So, in order to stop those 35,000 fatalities completely from happening, Bernie Sanders' bill will take 3 full years to do that. Okay, they
Right.
actually only do it in the fourth year, whereas the John Conyers bill would probably take about a year to implement. So
Right.
by the year, everybody would be on insurance, and we wouldn't be having any fatalities due to lack of insurance
Right.
anymore. At one point, I estimated what the fatality cost was from 2009 to 2016. In other words, what the fatalities were that resulted from the path Obama chose to take, okay, in 2009,
Right.
when he tanked. He and Max Baucus basically torpedoed HR 676
Right.
and wouldn't allow a vote in Congress. Of
Right.
course, also Nancy Pelosi played along with that.
Of course. Of course.
And so 356,000 people died who did not have to die. Okay, that was my calculation.
Right.
In any, I don't want to see that happen again. If the
Right.
Democrats should come back into power in the form of a progressive Congress or a more progressive one in by 2019, then I don't want to see any nonsense involving cushioning the blow for the insurance companies.
Right.
Worries about how many people in the insurance industry would be put out of jobs
Right.
uh, due to Medicare for All being implemented, okay, in 1 year. And the reason why I don't cry any tears about that is because there was an econometric study done by the California Nurses Association in the period 2008. It was released in the early part of 2009. And that study showed a net gain of 2.5 million jobs due to the passage, okay, of Medicare for All. That study has been pretty much forgotten now, but I've never forgotten it. And I've never seen a better study concerning the economic impact, okay, of Medicare for All.
Right.
Okay, and even if the net gain in jobs was a fraction of what was mentioned, okay, in that particular study, it would still be a positive gain of jobs. So the fact is that the people losing their jobs in the insurance industry would have lots of other places to go.
Right.
And there's no reason to worry about them or to shed any tears because they would have to quit the industry of murderers by spreadsheet. I don't think that any of us ought to shed a tear concerning that. I think we need to be done with it as quickly, okay, as possible.
Right.
So that's an opinion, okay, of mine. I bring it to you because you might not have heard or run into the fatality statistics before.
So I have actually heard the fatality statistics. The statistic I heard was a little bit lower than that, I think. But I'm going to go ahead and go with what you're saying. But I would go back to just
Well,
really quickly.
I'll send you a post on it
Yeah.
that outlines the calculations, okay, that I went through and that also compares a number of studies
Hmm.
that deal with fatality statistics,
Sure.
shows the differences in the ratios. Okay, in other words, the fatality ratios, whether it's 1 out of 1,000 people,
Right.
And 781 people. There's even one study that shows 1 out of 322 people fatalities
Wow.
due to lack of insurance. I don't think that study, is accurate. But I think the ratio is something like 1 in 769.
Right.
And that is plenty serious enough, because when you translate that in terms of the number of people not covered by the ACA right now,
Yeah.
and that's how you get to the roughly 35,000 a year.
Right.
Still at this point. Okay. So anyway, I'll send you that so you can see for yourself what the basis of the calculation is, which ought to strengthen your arguments.
Well, and I would say the reason why I brought up the 562 hearing is because, as we know, California has the sixth largest economy in the world. We just passed up France this past year. At 1 out of every 8 Americans is Californian. And so the reason I brought up the California bill is because, in a lot of ways, that bill is going to be very important to selling this type of plan, to selling Medicare for all to states like Texas and states like New York, the bigger states that are hesitant to do so because they're worried about cost. As we both know, cost should be irrelevant, but we need to be able to point to a large state that has success, and I think California should be leading the way on that. And so that's why I actually brought up the SB 562 hearing, because from what I heard in that hearing, just in California, we'd save $40 billion a year by providing Medicare for all. $40 billion that we could use towards roads, towards schools, towards education, towards the list goes on and on and on. Imagine if we're looking at that's just California. I'm wondering how that compares to the nation as a whole. And so you are correct. I would be voting on a national bill, but I'm interested in the implications behind selling that bill based on what's going on in California to the nation as a whole.
Right. But the reason why California, while a very useful case for the nation as a whole, doesn't really translate to the nation as a whole is because of the sovereign currency considerations.
Right.
If we're talking of the nation as a whole, then we don't have to worry about the federal government running short of dollars to support Medicare for all, which, of course, in California, you have to use your dollars to spend for various things, including the Medicare for All bill. Whereas at the federal level, you're not using tax dollars.
Right.
And so it's a different story.
Right, absolutely.
So it's, in a way, should be much, much easier to pass a Medicare for All bill at the federal level. And also the advantage of that is that all Americans then are equal.
Absolutely.
I mean, it won't be like the Affordable Care Act, where the country is segmented in so many different ways, by states, by class, by income. Just a totally unequal situation in terms of provision of healthcare to people. It's a real slice and dice type of Republican bill that sets one American against another American. Always conquer. It's a divide and conquer bill. Whereas Medicare for All is for everybody.
Right, absolutely.
Everybody. It considers healthcare a right.
Right.
And so, okay, but what I'd like to do is, I think I've gotten off track considerably. What I want to get to now is your platform beyond supporting the Medicare for All bill.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. So we have seven planks on our platform. Medicare for All is the final plank on our platform. So I can actually tell you about one of the planks that people don't, that is kind of still in the topic, but that people don't really realize how much it impacts my district specifically. So I'm a big fan of Tip O'Neill. I'm sure you are too, Joe. You probably have studied Tip O'Neill and his philosophy on government and his philosophy on running the House of Representatives. And so what I believe
I'm not Just to add something with respect to Tip O'Neill,
Yeah.
I'm not really a big fan of Tip
Okay.
O'Neill. Okay, I
Okay.
think
Absolutely.
he should have fought uh, uh, Ronald Reagan every step of the way. Okay, in the
Sure.
Reagan administration, the Social Security compromise, in particular, was horrendous and is the source of the propaganda
Right.
that we see being spread about the government running out of money with respect to Social Security.
Sure.
That comes out of directly the compromise that
Right.
was made by Tip O'Neill with Ronald Reagan.
Right.
So Tip O'Neill is not a hero of mine. Now I understand he did say something very true that
Right.
all politics is local.
Which is exactly what I was going to say.
I
so,
know, and that does work for the Congress, but
right.
it may be true as the Congress actually works today.
Right.
But it is really not as it should be when one is voting for a congressperson. In other
Right.
words, there is the interest of the district, but there's also the interest of the country at large. There
Right.
is the
Of course.
consideration of public
Absolutely.
purpose,
Right.
and a congressperson has to be concerned about that too. But anyway,
Yeah.
let's go on about your local district.
No, no, you're fine. So I think, and you bring up some really good points because obviously, as a congressperson, there are matters of national security that I would be voting on. There are matters of defense spending, authorization of war, so on and so forth. Those sort of things that I would be voting on, or I should say, military authorization of force. But what I do believe Tip O'Neill did say that was true is absolutely that all politics is local. The problem with my district is that Devin Nunes has represented us for almost 20 years. He does not come home to our district. He does not come home on the weekends. I know our local assembly person comes home every Friday. I see him all the time when I'm out campaigning because he's home every week. Devin Nunes has, I think, a house in Connecticut, so he goes to Connecticut every weekend. He hasn't held a town hall in, believe it or not, he's in Connecticut every weekend.
Yeah,
He's
so he ought to run in Connecticut. I mean, he's obviously entertaining the health insurance companies up in Connecticut.
I don't know, but what I would say though is that our district needs
Companies.
some. I'm sorry. Our district needs someone who's going to stand up for their values and for their issues. And one of the biggest issues that we have in our district is that I want to take a lead on is immigration reform. So I'm sure you're familiar with the H-1B visa, also known as the guest worker program. A
Yeah.
huge portion of the recipients of H-1B visa are in my district. My question is, if unemployment in my district has always been historically high, it's always been around 10 to 12%. Why do we have need for an H-1B visa program when we have plenty of people here that are able to work, that are looking for jobs, that are not able to find them? And so what I would like to do, one of the main planks of our platform is to suspend the program until unemployment is down to 3, maybe 5% at most. We don't have need for an H-1B visa. And that's not because I'm, a racist. Some people have called me a racist for saying that. I actually grew up with Mexican family. So it's nothing to do with that at all. It's everything to do with the fact that a lot of these H-1B visa holders are being exploited. I saw a report the other day that said 80% of women who work in agriculture have been sexually harassed, abused, defamed, raped, whatever you want to use for the term. 80% of the women that work in agriculture, a huge part of them are in my district. And the reason why they're not reporting it is because a lot of them are H-1B visa holders or they have no documentation at all. So they feel that if they report it, that there's going to be consequences, i.e. their visa is going to be taken away or they're going to be deported or both. And so that's a huge part of our platform that we're looking at. We'd like to grant all the current holders of H-1B visas citizenship if possible. I'd like to see them become citizens, especially if they've worked here for 2-3 years. They've been here a few seasons. I say give them citizenship. Suspend the program until unemployment is down to 3 to 5%. I don't see any need for that program. And I know that's kind of obscure for people in other districts because a lot of politics has become such a national focus. But in my district, that is what is hurting our economy. That's what's hurting people is that the farmers don't want to pay to have people that, pay them minimum wage. to go work a job when they can pay them, $2 an hour or whatever, and skim off the top, so to speak, and they can't. The workers have no recourse. They can't do anything because they could get deported. So it's a bad situation for all of us. It's a bad situation for us that are looking for jobs. It's a bad situation for those workers, and it's only good for the farmers. So that's something that I would like to see happen.
Yes, it's also something, okay, that I would like to see happen also.
Really?
I don't think convincing on a point like this, because some time ago, back in 1959, I did some survey research in,
Really?
yes, in New York State. I was a senior in college at the time, and I did some research that was actually conducted by the agricultural school at
Really?
Cornell. Okay, and the professor wanted to look into the condition of the migrant workers in New York State, and so we traveled around to all the country, all the counties, okay, in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
That had a sizable population, okay, of the migrant workers who came in the summer to pick, okay, and we were of course exposed to the conditions they lived in,
Yeah.
and I have never forgotten that.
Yeah.
Okay, in some of the rural areas, okay, of New York State, it perhaps wasn't so surprising. But when we went out to Long Island, we went out to Suffolk County and saw the conditions that the migrant workers were laboring in at that time. It was just astonishing to me that this could be allowed in the United States.
Yep.
This was going on all through New York State, okay, at that time. I don't know if it exists anymore, okay. I suspect it doesn't exist there. But I also suspect that conditions in California are still very similar to what I saw back at at that time, and that migrant workers. I shouldn't say the migrant workers, because these are workers, okay, on the H-1B visas, but at the same time, it seems to me they're captured in almost the same way, because the possibility of lifting their visas, or finding that some of them, okay, are undocumented. And so they're afraid of deportation, and they can be exploited in the worst way.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with that kind of situation now since, what is it, 65 years since then? No, it can't be 65 years since then, because I wasn't 12 at that time. Okay, but it's got to be...
What, 59 years now?
9 years.
Yeah.
50, yeah, since that time. Right.
Yeah. And it's a horrible thing. I've actually done ride-alongs with law enforcement, and I've gotten some flack for that too, because some of the people in my area have said, how could you ride along with them after the police are doing what they're doing to young unarmed black men? And I believe in hearing all sides of the story. I know the police in my district and in the ride-alongs that I've been on have been the utmost professional. They've been the utmost professional to the people they interacted with. And of course, I was there with them, so I can't say that they are like that all the time. I can only go off of what I saw and what I believe about them. But that being said, I talked with one of the sheriffs, and we have a lot of people that are on the corners of different streets, and they sell like fruit. I don't know if you have them in New York or if anyone else has them in other states, but they're very widespread here in California. Normally they sell fruit or roses, or normally produce or flowers of some sort, or some sort of like candy item, and they're on the side of the road. And they all have these certain umbrellas that have like a rainbow pattern to them, like a Mexican or Latin American rainbow pattern to them. And the Tulare County Sheriff's officer that I spoke with, he told me, the people you see out on the road? And I said, well, yeah, of course, like who doesn't in our area know about these people? And he said, those people are they're basically slaves. And I said, what? And he began to explain to me that because of how difficult it has become to immigrate here legally, and because of the demand to want to come here and to work in the fields and such, these people are treated like slaves. A lot of the women, according to him, a lot of the women are forced into, sex work, to be sex workers, to pay for them to either come here or to pay for them to not have to have their H-1B visa revoked. So they come here on an H-1B visa thinking they're going to go work in the field. And whoever sponsored their visa says, no, you're not going to work in the field. You're actually going to be doing something else. And they don't have a choice. It's either that or go back to where they came from. And a lot of them don't want to do that. And so,
because they were driven off the land themselves by NAFTA. And the impact, of NAFTA, which gets us into foreign policy, and into the trade relations. So, my question for you now, is where do you stand in many issues in foreign policy, including trade relations?
So, as far as foreign policy goes, I'm a real big. I know when we were speaking before we started, you said that you studied conflict resolution and international politics and peace. I'm a real big peace person. I'm a real big sit down at the table, figure out what a good solution is. I know that some people might get mad at me for saying this, but when Trump said he was going to sit down and talk with North Korea, I didn't think that was necessarily the worst idea. We have China currently in talks with them. I just saw an article today that North Korea has agreed to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. That's wonderful news. I think that's a wonderful thing. If they follow through with it, we'll see. That remains to be seen. But I think there should always be a goal. There should always be the highest ideal to strive for peace. As far as trade goes, I believe in protecting the American worker. I think NAFTA was a terrible deal. I think CAFTA was a terrible deal. I think TPP is a terrible deal. I mean, we continue to see these neoliberal centrist policies that are being formulated by both Democrats and Republicans, and they're just harming everybody. They're harming manufacturing. They're driving jobs out of the country. They're keeping wages stagnant. America used to be a manufacturing beacon. I will give Obama credit for saving Detroit. I mean, that was a great policy for him to go ahead and use the government to stabilize Detroit. That was a good call on his part. But as far as some of these other deals that we see,
he didn't actually stabilize Detroit so much. He stabilized the auto manufacturers. Two different things.
There you go. That's a good point, right? That's a very good point, because we know Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water still. So
yeah, but not only that, Detroit is half a wasteland now.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. It's like a third world country from everything I've heard and seen. That you can't even go out to some of the parts of it anymore, which is, it's terrible. But to answer your question, I think trade had a lot to do with that, because Detroit was a manufacturing hub at one point for our country. And I believe that those disastrous, NAFTA, CAFTA, TPP, thank God TPP didn't pass, but those had a direct impact into a lot of American workers losing their jobs. And there's not something else that was planted for them to take up into. So I don't, I definitely think that we need to negotiate smarter deals with our allies. I wouldn't blame Trump for wanting to withdraw from NAFTA. I know he's talked about it a couple times. I think that we can negotiate a better deal. Do I think that we should have absolutely free trade? No, I think that it ultimately harms the worker. It ultimately harms all of us.
Now, also, although those deals are sold as free trade deals,
right,
they're not about free trade.
Right.
What they're really about is the protection of the corporations.
Exactly.
Our multinational corporations.
Right.
In foreign countries. And in order to get that, we're willing to trade for rules that also protect foreign corporations in this country against American laws, future laws that we might want to pass in order to control the corporations.
Right.
There's a clause in each of these treaties, not just in these treaties, but it's been in bilateral treaties now for many years, actually, since the 1970s. It's called the Investor State Dispute Settlement Clause, ISDS.
Uh-huh.
What it provides for is it gives foreign multinationals the right to sue the United States government in tribunals, international tribunals run by private persons, staffed by corporate lawyers who are not even full time working on the tribunals. They work
Right.
part time for the tribunals and part time for multinational corporations
Right.
that may very well at some future time be suing while they're sitting on a tribunal temporarily, creating a beautiful conflict of interest
Right.
situation. But the really horrific thing about all this is that when these tribunals make a decision, if the United States has signed a treaty, okay, is party to a treaty that allows this kind of suit, when a decision is made by these courts, there is, according to the treaty, no recourse to Article 3 courts, Article 3 of the Constitution, our
Right.
court system.
Right.
The Supreme Court has no say at all in this. If a
Right.
local area passes a law that is perceived by a multinational corporation as
Right.
hurting its potential profits, that corporation can sue in the tribunals and has a chance of getting a judgment that, mind you, will not cause the local government to have to pay a fine or to back off from the laws it's passed or the state governments. No, the federal government is responsible for what the local governments or the state governments have done. So the judgment is rendered by the international court. As long as the federal government sticks by the treaty, it has to pay the fine. Okay? Not the state or the local governments. So what's going to happen in that situation? Well, the Congress will look to pass a national law that outlaws what the state, okay, and local governments have done, so there won't be any future cases of judgments like this.
Right.
So there's going to be federalism conflicts inside of the United States
Of
as a
course.
result of passing these major treaties. And constitutional questions are also going to be raised because, according to our Constitution, there's no legal authority in the United States higher than the Article 3 courts.
Right.
Congress cannot create such an authority. It doesn't have the constitutional authority to do that.
Right. Absolutely.
These treaties are going to raise constitutional questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And they're going to be constitutional questions about superseding the sovereignty of the United States. Ironically, one of the major opponents of the TPP was Jeff Sessions when he was the
Really?
senator from Alabama.
What?
The grounds that he opposed the TPP on were grounds of sovereignty.
Right.
He knew the TPP had the potential to breach American sovereignty, and he would have none of it. So if you look at the voting for the TPA that gave the president the authority to negotiate the TPP,
Mm-hmm.
the IP, okay, and the TISA,
Mm-hmm.
the TPA, which actually provided for Congress to have just an up or down vote. Okay, if the president was successful, okay, in actually negotiating a deal,
Right.
uh, okay, that authority was passed in, if I recall correctly, it was in 2015. I
Yes,
covered
I believe
that
you're right.
really closely. Okay, and if you look at the five Republicans in the Senate who opposed the TPP bill, in a case of every vote about that, the leading Republican to oppose it was Jeff Sessions.
And that's so interesting because, people, I will say this, people think that Jeff Sessions is not a smart guy. And he's not a stupid man. I mean, I know that they parody him a lot on SNL. He's not a stupid man. If I'm not mistaken, he studied constitutional law when he was in school, and so he is a lawyer. He was a lawyer, so he's not a dummy. And I know they like to make fun of him a lot on SNL, but he's a smart man when it comes to. I disagree with him about everything, granted, but I mean, he got that one right at least, right?
You got that one wrong.
There you go.
And he was a big reason why it was difficult to actually pass that.
Right.
And in the end, why it required the cooperation, okay, of Nancy Pelosi to.
Oh, Nancy.
It never was passed in the House except for Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, yeah.
Now, she voted against it in the end.
Right.
But not before she gave free rein to the Democrats who were in favor of the TPP. The
Yep.
reason why 28 Democrats voted for the TPP was because Nancy Pelosi stayed neutral into the last few days on the TPP and didn't exert party discipline at all on that vote.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that the Democrats are very good at keeping discipline when it suits them, but they're very good at making sure that the discipline somehow magically falls apart whenever it's stuff that's going to really hurt the American consumer. And I mean, we can talk about the bank deregulation that just happened a couple weeks ago. 17 Senate Democrats, I want to say, I might be wrong on that number, maybe it was 13, but still over a dozen Democrats, Senate Democrats said, okay, we're going to go ahead and go back to Great Recession, regulations for the most part. I mean, it's insanity, and they know what the result is going to be.
A few more. Yep. Absolutely.
So,
okay, so I take it then you're opposed to the authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF,
yes.
and would vote against that when it comes up again.
I have to say, I really admire Barbara Lee. She's a congresswoman here. She represents Oakland, and she has been a voice against that for quite a while now, for about, I think, 10 years that she's been trying to introduce, bill after bill. And I think they finally started to get some headway this last year on it. I would absolutely vote to rescind that authorization of force. It's been used to instigate so many conflicts all over the world. And I mean, we can all agree the Middle East is kind of a mess right now. And it's not really their fault in a lot of situations. It takes two to tango. And the U.S. has used that authorization to kind of decide which regions that they were going to act upon. I'm kind of more of a, like I said, I'm more of a let's sit down and talk together. If you are constantly telling people you're not going to sit down and talk with them, well, then how can we be surprised when we have a pissing contest, excuse my language, but when we have a pissing contest, when we're not willing to sit down and even talk to the guy. And I think that attitude has been, and it's both sides. That's a neoliberal attitude of, both Republicans and Democrats have kind of gone back and forth on this issue. If we can't sit down and talk to each other, then what is the point? And so, yeah, I would definitely vote to rescind that authorization. The authorization that came up last week for Yemen, if that was in front of the House, I would have voted against it. I know that was a Senate authorization. I would have voted against that. I think that there were some Republicans. I know Paul from Kentucky voted. Yeah, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, he voted against it. There were a few Republicans that voted against it. And I say bravo to them for standing up and saying, look, enough war. We constantly are bombing all these countries. We're buying Saudi Arabia tanks. We're giving Israel, which, you know, we can talk about that a different time, but we're giving Israel billions of dollars. We're giving all of these countries billions of dollars to defend themselves, but then we're turning around and telling our own citizens, sorry, Joe, you can't have treatment for your problem. If you can't get health care, well, then that sucks to be you. Or sorry, JM, if you need food stamps to make sure that you can supplement your life so that you actually can live until you get on your feet, well, then we're sorry. We're not going to do that for you. You deserve that sort of thing. But we don't apply that same standard when we're dealing with these countries around the world where we decided, you know, in some cases we decide we don't like your dictator, so we're going to take that dictator out. That was democratically elected, whether we like it or not. And then look at what subsequently has happened. And so I'm a big peace person. I'm a big sit down at the table, talk with people. I would like to see, Dennis Kucinich originally had proposed instituting a Department of Peace, and he was laughed at. I don't know, I'm sure you remember that. He was laughed at for saying we should have a Department of Peace. And people made fun of him. And I think that was probably one of the smartest ideas that I've heard by a presidential candidate ever. That was a great idea. Why don't we have a Department of Peace? I would like to see a Department of Peace with the State Department folded into it to really begin the mission of bringing people together, because so many people have suffered at this point. So many people have died for what?
Well, we have used our force to break the social fabric.
Right.
Countries in the Middle East that we bomb.
Yeah.
And a good deal of North Africa is currently not too far from chaos as a result of the interventions that we managed. Okay, and of course the Yemen situation, okay, is unforgivable.
Right.
Okay, and also the Iraq intervention was in no way due to the responsibility of Iraq for 9/11.
Right.
We know that now. That is a huge sin of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there were a good many of our soldiers killed.
Right.
Okay, because the death toll, okay, has apparently risen to 1 million Iraqis.
Right.
We have collaborated in the breaking of Syria. It's not just the Syrian state. It's about Syrian society.
Right.
We have broken that apart, and there's a legacy of chaos there. And there will be a legacy, okay, of chaos there. Obviously, the Israelis stood to gain from that, and the Saudi monarchy as well. But there will be continuing blowback towards the United States as a result of these foreign policies. Okay, and the Ukrainian policy has been another disaster. Disaster.
Yeah.
The idea of taking a state that borders on Russia and that historically has been a part of the Russian Empire, okay, and the USSR, and putting in a regime hostile to Russia, that is asking for war.
Right.
It's just asking for war. If not immediately, it's asking for war down the road.
Right, absolutely.
It's just, I mean, our foreign policies over the last 10 to 15 years have just been horrendous.
Absolutely. And I mean, and we have to remember that Iraq, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Joe, but Iraq was one of the wealthier and more stabilized democracies or even states in that region before we invaded. Of course,
it wasn't a democracy. Okay. Of course, it had been making progress towards democracy during the 1950s, but haltingly, intermittently, And with the accession of Saddam, that just came to a stop.
Right.
But at least Saddam did not entirely break Iraqi society. He did
Right.
some. He did some of that. Okay, with his isolation of the Kurds. Okay, the
Right.
Kurds, and with his enmity towards the Shia.
Right.
Uh, okay, and creating a situation where the Sunnis, okay, were dominating
Right.
the Iraqi situation. He did much there to break apart the social structure, okay, of Iraq, which had been growing and actually integrating the various groups with each other. And he turned all that around. So
Right.
he was really terrible for Iraq. But when he was overthrown, okay, and when we intervened, at least an Iraqi civil society still existed to some degree.
Right.
Okay, now there's a question about whether there is any civil society there.
Right.
Okay, let's move over to the domestic arena.
Sure.
Okay, you have extensive programs there in your platform. Please
Yeah.
tell us about them.
Yeah, so I think the biggest program that we are calling for is that we're going to be calling for college education for all. When I wrote our original draft, or that second draft, I should say, of that platform, I had not really begun to study MMT. So I think that draft you're looking at says up to an associate's degree. Now that I've kind of become more immersed in the MMT world, and now that we've had more information that has come out saying, hey, student loan, I just saw another one today that came out that said student loan debt forgiveness is absolutely what we need to do. I think that why should we not be paying for bachelors? We should absolutely have free public education. We should absolutely forgive student debt. Again, I am for Medicare for all. I think that universal health care should be a right, not an entitlement, but a right, a basic human right. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't have it, as if I'm not mistaken there. Also, we've got some ambitious programs. I've been talking a little bit more with Johnny Axum about federal jobs guarantee. I've been kind of watching y'all's programs and looking into what a federal jobs guarantee would look like. And I know we all know someone who's an artist or a singer or a poet or just a painter or whatever the case is that has a talent that they're not putting to use because they can't make money doing that. And if we had a federal jobs guarantee, who knows? I think Rocco was the one who said, who knows what could be created? You might have an artist that makes a piece that inspires millions of people. I feel like we have become so stuck on making money that we forgot that we should do what we enjoy doing. And that's a part of capitalism, I believe.
Okay, well, you said that in your district, the
Uh-huh.
unemployment rate is always between 10 and 12%.
Yeah, 10 to 15, actually. 10 to 15 normally fluctuates.
Okay, were you talking about the U3 unemployment statistic?
I believe that's calculated with seasonal. Can you define U3 for me? I'm not quite sure what you mean by U3.
Okay, U3 unemployment refers to the people. Uh, okay, it includes people who do not have either full-time jobs
Right, underemployed.
or part-time jobs. Okay,
Right. So ours is 12 to 15. I think it's normally an average of 10 to 15%, and that's either they are not employed at all or they are underemployed severely, like meaning they work 20 hours or less, or they're making a certain dollar amount or less. So I'm not quite sure how that fits into. I've never heard it described as U3, but I can tell you that it's people that
okay.
don't have a job or they don't make
The
enough.
best designation for that type of unemployment is
Okay.
U3 unemployment. When you normally see a headline statistic like,
Right.
oh, the unemployment rate has fallen to before 0.1%, okay, this
Right.
month, something like that, it refers to the U3 statistic. Now, there's
Gotcha.
also a U6, okay, statistic. Okay, and the U6 is actually greater than the U3. The reason for that is it doesn't count the part-time employed, okay, as employed.
Right.
So the surveys of the part-time employed finds out how many of them would like to be full-time employed,
Mm-hmm.
and then computes the statistic, okay, on that basis.
Right.
So while in rough terms, the U3 unemployment for the country as a whole might right now be 6 million,
Right.
something like that. If you look at the new the U6, it adds another 5.5 million to that figure.
Right.
So you get to a figure of 11 million or maybe 12 million.
Right.
Okay. So, okay, but then there's another statistic that's not actually computed by the BLS, and that's called, or might be called, the disemployment statistic.
Hmm.
And the disemployed are not only the U3 and the U6 people, but people who have left the official workforce.
Right. Okay. Right.
You
And they
get
no
some
longer seeking
feel
employment.
for how many they are. If
Right.
you look at the people, if we look at the labor participation rate, so right now the labor participation rate is somewhere near 63%. But at the height of the good times, quote unquote, I don't think they were very height of the good times during the Bush administration,
Right.
labor participation rate was 67%,
Right.
4% more than it is now.
Right.
So roughly, it turns out that when you throw in those 4% or so, or more even, uh, because the total population is much higher now. At
Right. Of
the
course.
time of the Bush administration, it's now grown to 325 million people.
Right.
It actually turns out that the total number, okay, of unemployed people right now is in the neighborhood of 23 to 24 million people.
Yeah.
If we had a federal jobs guarantee program, there would be 23, 24, maybe even 25 million people that would get employed by that particular program.
Yep. And I say that we all know someone who has been searching for a job, has been putting in applications. I definitely also, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I think we need to raise the minimum wage. A big part of our platform has been raising the minimum wage to 22 an hour. I've seen studies, and most say between 22 and 24 based on the COLA adjustments and on cost of living adjustments and that sort of thing. And so we're shooting for 22. I know 15 is
Now,
what most.
not just based on the cost of living adjustment, but also based on assuming that
Right.
the workers are entitled to share in the productivity gains
Right.
that have been made since 1968. And so, using that, as well as the cost of living adjustments, that's how you get to the 22 to 25 per
Right.
hour. So yes,
Right.
it would be much more than just the $15 an hour.
Right.
Okay, and that's a very good part of your platform. But the MMT idea of a federal job guarantee at a living wage,
Mm-hmm.
it depends on how we interpret that term,
Mm-hmm.
wage. A lot of the MMTers now, or candidates who are friendly, okay, to MMT, are still thinking in terms of the $15 an hour. And Bernie Sanders himself has been talking in terms, okay, of $15 an hour, but even saying there would be a transition period where the $15 an hour would not go fully into force until 2000, okay, in 22. Well, people started asking for $15 an hour in 2012. It's 10
Right.
years since then.
Yeah.
Okay, so $15 an hour is definitely not adequate,
No,
and
it's
it's
not.
also it's a very timorous proposal to put forward the $15 an hour now. I mean, it's not at all an out there proposal.
Right.
Okay, so it seems to me you're very right to propose a $22 an hour job guarantee.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. I think 20, I mean, I lived in San Antonio, Texas for 5 years. And when I first moved to Texas, I was making 13 an hour. This was in 2013. So costs were a little bit different then. I was making 13 an hour when I first got there. The highest that I ever got up to when I still lived in San Antonio was, I think 18. At one point, I was making 18 an hour, which is fairly good. That's a pretty good, but even I was struggling. And San Antonio is a large city, granted, but it's in one of the cheaper cost of living states. Texas is not a very expensive state to live in. The costs are not very expensive there. So you figure I was struggling to make ends meet on $18 an hour. I wasn't ever able to save anything. I wasn't ever able to really save. I was barely able to save for retirement. You figure if we have people in New York City and Manhattan or Los Angeles or San Francisco, 22 an hour is probably still not going to be enough for some of them. So I think the least we can do is push for 22 an hour. I think that we'll see a lot of different changes with that $22 an hour minimum wage. We'll see a lot more spending.
Some of the job guarantees now are specifying that a cost of living adjustment
Mm-hmm.
could be included in the job guarantee program, so that
I think so.
the wage offered in the middle, okay, of New York City or the middle of LA or San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco would be far higher than the living wage that the job guarantee program would offer in the middle of Kansas, let's say,
Right.
or in some of the poorer parts of Texas or
Right.
um, say Mississippi,
Right.
okay, or in Ironwood, Michigan. That's kind of very out of the way spot. Okay, Michigan, where you can still buy some sizable houses for $35,000.
Right.
Anyway, okay, so you're for the job guarantee, and you're for Medicare for all, and you're for free college for all,
I am.
and you're for student debt elimination
Absolutely.
as well.
Yes.
Okay, where do you stand on Social Security?
So I actually have signed the CFAR contract, so CFAR 2018. And if I'm not mistaken, the contract calls for an increase of 20%. I would actually like to see closer to 30%. Based on the research I've done and the talking with people that I've done, they say, yeah, 20% would really, really help a lot. But if you want to see us live comfortably and not have to really worry and kind of enjoy our retirement, a 30% push would be really good. And so I believe the CFAR calls for 20%, and I'm going to push for 30 because I believe, again, we know we can afford it. We print our money. We can afford to give people on Social Security 30% extra income. The question.
This to you. We have to be looking more to the level of what some of the really decent pensions
Yeah, absolutely.
are paid by the European states uh, to their citizens.
Sure.
What kinds of pensions are there for Danish citizens or
Right.
for the Swedish citizens or the Swiss, let's say,
Right.
French. Okay, I think if you look into those, you will find that some of those states are paying twice what we are, and some of those states are not even currency sovereigns. Okay,
Well, yeah, because a lot of those that you mentioned are Eurozone, right? So yeah.
yes. But I don't think that Sweden shares the euro as a currency.
No, they use the krone, I believe. The krone still, Sweden does.
And also Denmark too hasn't
Right.
signed into the euro yet. Okay, they've been holding off because they see the disaster. Okay, Europe now. Okay, as a
Right.
result of the euro. So, um, okay, so essentially, what I'm saying, and I say this as someone who gets Social Security, so I can be viewed, okay, as biased on this, but it seems to me that someone who lives in a high cost area uh, probably needs. Okay, and there are no cost of living adjustments for Social Security. It's
I
the
know. I saw that.
country. There's
Yeah.
COLAs, but there are no regional cost of living adjustments.
Right.
So if you want to stay near your grandchildren, and they happen to live in Ashburn, Virginia, where I live, okay, then I'm here to tell you we need something more like a doubling of our Social Security.
Right.
But Warren Mosler had a proposal out uh, not too long ago. I think he still holds to this proposal that we ought to increase the Social Security payments to a flat $2,000 a month per person.
I think that's a great idea because the current rate is about 1,300, right? 1,300 or just 1,200.
I'm not sure what it averages. I do know there are a lot of people who are down around Social Security payments of $500, $600, $700.
Wow.
Following the subtraction of the charges for Medicare, they end up with $500 a month to live on. Okay, now the senior development that I live in, okay, I live in, in one of those,
Hmm.
which was considered a Section 8 subsidized development. Not everybody in it is actually subsidized themselves through Section 8, but the development is. So it
Hmm.
has regular rental rates, okay, that it charges. So
Uh-huh.
you said, for example, that the average rate in the country for someone might be something like 1,200 a month or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what the figure is, okay, at this point,
Right.
but I can tell you that the rent here for a one bedroom apartment is something close to $900 a month.
Yep.
So the average single person, okay, who is living here after paying rent would have exactly $300 a month, okay, for everything else.
Which is
So
just not feasible.
that's not feasible. So what basically happens is that the children, okay, of people who live here are helping their parents out, uh, and so that's what's going on. The
Right.
Many of the elderly here who currently are burdens on their children, and of course. Uh, that's something that is a drag on the economy of the United States also.
Right, absolutely. And I mean it's demeaning to the people that have to deal with it. No one wants to be positioned to where they can't afford to care for themselves and I don't believe that it's right. It's not morally acceptable that we put people in that position to where they're
It's
not
not
able to care for
morally
themselves.
acceptable, and it's not in line with the Second Bill of Rights,
Yep.
FDR's
Yep.
Economic Bill of Rights,
Right, absolutely.
which should be still uh, the vision of the Democratic Party.
Yes. One second, Joe. I'm going to turn on my light real quick for you here. That way we get a little bit more light here. Sorry, I saw it was getting kind of dark, so you can see me a little bit better there.
Yeah, that is better.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is, how much do you want to specify? Okay, and okay, so basically, I'm suggesting that you think that, but through more. Okay, and of course, if you start to present all these proposals to people in your campaign, which you are already doing, you're going to come up against people who are going to say, "How can we afford all that? We have the debt. We can't really have deficits."
Yeah, the Republicans have been kind of brilliant at doing their little debt clock ticking upwards to scare everyone into thinking we're broke and we can't afford anything. So my district is historically undereducated. We get a lot of people that go off to college and they don't come back to this area. And a lot of my district do not have high school diplomas. And so for me, from my perspective, the way that I've tried to approach talking about this, and it's different with everyone. So I think that what I've tried to do is kind of explain to them that we print our own money. These programs that we're looking at paying for are going to be paid for with American dollars. We print our own money. We don't owe money to we don't owe money to anybody. And I've seen the videos that China has bought bonds, bought savings bonds. So China is buying just savings bond. They're not buying our country. They're not going to overtake us. Because we have a lot of fear in my district. There's a lot of Trump voters in my district. I've also tried explaining it to them like this. Why does the talk about the deficit and the national debt not come up when we're passing the Bush tax cuts and now the Trump tax cuts? We didn't talk about the national debt then. When we're bombing a country, we don't talk about the national debt. The only time we ever talk about the national debt is when we're trying to do something that's going to help a lot of Americans in a very substantial way, and then all of a sudden the national debt conversation comes up. So I think that
such arguments are partly effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's well to point out the hypocrisy of the Republican Party and the weak response of the Democratic Party, because basically when the Democratic Party comes into office, after they've gone through, a number of years of bitterly criticizing the Republican Party because they do deficit spending for their donors, then the Democrats say, well, we must be fiscally responsible and we must have as low deficits as we possibly can have.
Right.
Increase the national debt, as little as we can have. So we can't pass the programs for our supporters because we have to be fiscally responsible. Right. This was Obama's tune. And this, of course, has been the tune that Nancy Pelosi has sung since she's gotten into the Congress.
Yeah.
She's been, for many years now, the main proponent of the pay-go system in Congress, which basically says when we pass the kind of legislation that you are advocating for right now, we have to specify the taxes that are going to pay for it. And we have to ask the CBO to
score it.
To do scoring and to score it as fiscally neutral before we can actually agree to pass these things. So, of course, this is why the progressives always lose, because they sign on to that.
Yep.
And because they accept Nancy Pelosi's view that she is somehow a progressive. I don't think she's had a progressive bone in her body since Harvey Milk was killed.
Listen.
That's where I think she originally established credentials or some credentials. She and Dianne Feinstein both led people to think that they were progressive people when they really were budding oligarchs.
Yep.
But anyway, here's an answer to the how you're going to pay for it question.
Right.
Okay, so I've got it on the screen now. I'm going to make it solo for a minute so you can see it. on your screen. Okay, can you read it to me?
Yeah, so it says, question, your programs look expensive. How are you going to pay for them? And then it says, answer, at the end of every money bill we pass in Congress, we'll order the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in the Treasury spending account by the amount we've ordered the Treasury to spend. We'll also order the Federal Reserve to increase the same balance by enough to cancel the portion of the national debt that will fall due during the period covered by our spending. That sounds simple to me. So that will fund new spending and also reduce parts of the debt as we go. I can't read the bottom line. As we go along, can't read the last line there.
Okay, let me see if I can read it.
My picture's in the way here. Maybe that's why. Can I move this? Nah, not quite.
Let me put my glasses on here. But that will fund new spending and reduce parts of the debt as we go along until it is eventually gone.
Right.
So if this were boilerplate, okay, I have the legislative language actually for this.
Okay.
And I can put it up, okay, in just a minute. Okay,
Sure.
but basically, if this were done and the legislative language of the boilerplate were put into every bill that goes through Congress, then the debt issue would be dead within 6 months, because within 6 months, people would be able to see, it would be reported that the national debt had fallen by something like, I'm not sure how much, $3 trillion, $4 trillion, maybe $5 trillion. I have to check that out, okay, and but be precise about that. But the reason why I say it is that a very high proportion of the national debt is short-term debt. It's 3-month debt or 6-month debt. Okay, it's just a huge proportion, because within a single year, we know from looking at the daily Treasury statement at the end of every fiscal year that during a single fiscal year, $54 trillion worth of debt might have been paid off by the Treasury Department. So you ask, how can that be? We owe only $21 trillion. How can we pay off $54 trillion and still have a $21 trillion left? Of course, the answer to that is we roll it. We roll the short-term debt. We're constantly rolling the short-term debt. So the point being, if we pay off $54 trillion of short-term debt in 1 year, then probably it's a good estimate to say that within 3 to 6 months, we're going to pay off $4 trillion of 21.5 trillion. So the public's going to see that, and it's going to say the debt going down by great gobs in just a short of time. And then when the Peterson Foundation and the people who are terrorists with respect to the debt try to stop the legislation we want to pass, by talking about the debt, it will be highly visible if they don't have a leg to stand on. They'll have to go into they won't be able to be in to that particular business anymore. But let me simplify this even more for you. When somebody asks you how you're going to pay for it, okay, then you can just say, we in Congress are going to order, in other words, with our appropriations bills, we order the Treasury Department to spend something like $3.6 trillion every year, okay, and growing. So we're going to order the Federal Reserve to place the $6 trillion in the Treasury spending account as soon as our appropriation bill passes. We're going to pay for it by ordering the Federal Reserve to give the money to the Treasury.
There you go.
That's it.
Yep.
I mean, it's a one-liner.
There you go. I like that.
Add a second line, okay, or you're going to say, and besides, we can order the Federal Reserve to give the Treasury the money it needs to pay off that part of the national debt that's coming due in that period. Second sentence.
Right. There you go.
Done. End of story in terms of answer to the question. Now, they might come up with some further questions. I'm not saying they won't. I am
Right.
saying that's a complete and legal and constitutional answer. And
Right.
why
Absolutely.
constitutional? Because it's entirely consistent with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution,
There you
that
go.
grants Congress, okay, and nobody else, the capability to create our sovereign money.
Right.
The Federal Reserve has been delegated the authority to create the reserves. The Treasury Department still holds the authority to mint the coins, and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department jointly hold the authority to create the currency.
Right.
The Bureau, okay, of Engraving and Printing physically creates the currency on order from the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve issues the currency in the form of the Federal Reserve notes that we all have in our pockets.
Right.
So that's the money story when it comes to the creation. Both of these agencies, the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve, have been delegated Congress's authority, which Congress doesn't lose because it's delegated.
No, not at all.
They just have been delegated the power to implement that authority because Congress is not an executive agency.
Right.
It's executive agencies to implement it.
Right.
For them, and the ones that do that are the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Okay. So I think I've given you some simple answers to that question.
Mm-hmm.
You might want to try them out and see how they work.
Yeah, I
kind
will.
of think that they're going to shut up a reporter, that he or she won't have heard them before, and they
Right.
won't know exactly how to answer. It's important that you say it, though, with confidence. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. There's one thing that I wanted to ask you. I couldn't help, but notice that one, of course, I know very well you've signed the CFAR.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and our Real Progressives group is now working very closely with Revolt against plutocracy, which is
Yes.
running
Yes.
the CFAR effort. We are unified with them on this effort at present. Okay, so we of course are very interested in CFAR candidates and in supporting CFAR candidates, and we're especially interested in supporting CFAR candidates who are MMT candidates as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's you. But I also think it would be interesting for others who are CFAR candidates to know what the differences are between your platform and the CFAR contract that you have signed on to.
Right.
So could you summarize that for us?
So I think there are a few key differences that we've kind of already touched on. I know the CFAR contract called for the $15 minimum hour or a $15 minimum wage. I actually made a note on my contract that I would be calling for 22, and I signed. I made that in brackets so that because the CFAR is based on public opinion. So all of the items on the CFAR contract are 60% approval rating or higher by all Americans. And so at first I had wrote 22, and then they advised me, they're like, wait a minute, you got to be careful there because 22 is probably not going to have the same approval rating. And so I made that note in brackets as far as that goes. And then also we did mention that the 20% Social Security increase is part of the CFAR. Again, I'm going to be pushing for probably at least 30. And I would like to see COLA or cost of living adjustments added to that. I would like to, I mean, the regional thing is something that I did know, that I knew as well, because that was part of the reason why my grandmother moved from California to Texas, was because she said, hey, look, I got a place to stay over here. I've got family over here, and the cost of living is way cheaper. My Social Security check, my SSI goes a lot farther in Texas than it does in California. So I think CFAR is definitely a great contract for candidates to sign on to. And I think that they tried to make sure, and I love it about the contract, they tried to make sure that it was things that had high approval ratings. I think there's just a couple areas where I'm going to probably push a little bit harder. And minimum wage is definitely one of them. The cost of living adjustment and the 30% increase for Social Security, that's another one that I'm going to push a lot harder on. I think the CFAR did what they did get absolutely right, though, was the need for peace, the need for peaceful dialogue and no more wars. That's a tenet of their contract as well. I also have signed the candidates, the CWAC. I don't know if you're familiar with the CWAC, but it's the candidates with a contract. The CFAR is a little bit more about doing what's right. The CWAC's a little bit more about doing what is not corrupt. So that contract I signed the other day, and I really liked that one because it calls for repealing Citizens United via constitutional amendment. It calls for public financing of campaigns. It calls for a 7-year ban on lobbying, because as we know, as I'm sure you're familiar with, Joe, we've got tons of people that leave office from Congress and they immediately go down the street to K Street and they're working for lobbying firms making multi-million dollars to go schmooze with their old buddies on the Hill. So there's, I'm sorry?
I'm very familiar with that, having lived in the Washington, D.C. area now since 1975.
Right.
I mean, I see that all around me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's funny because most of the Congress people, they know, look, if I lose this job, it's okay. I don't have to go home. I don't have to leave Washington. I can go down to K Street, and they line up on, the day that the new class of Congress people get sworn in, they line up waiting for them to come in. And that's just how business is done there. And so I like the 7-year ban on lobbying for ex-government workers, or I think it's all government workers. I could be mistaken, but I know it's at least elected officials. But I would like to see that change. I think if you've worked in the government, there's no reason why you should immediately go into a lobbying job. It's just a corruption issue that we have. And so I like that I signed both contracts because, again, CFAR is about doing what's right. CWAC is about making sure that we continue to do what's right moving forward in future generations.
Okay, but when we go back to CFAR, I think CFAR is very good on the issues of actually stopping the murders of the minorities that we're currently seeing on our streets by the police.
Yes.
So CFAR, is very good on that issue.
Mm-hmm.
CFAR is also very good on the protection of LGBTQ.
Yes, absolutely.
As well. So you're right that CFAR is about what's right.
Right.
When it comes to doing what's right in relation to prohibitions, or things like that, enforcing laws, seeing to it that we get back the equal protection of the laws, or maybe get equal protection for the first time. I'm not so sure that CFAR is doing what's right in the areas of economic justice. Your platform seems much more satisfactory to me from that particular point of view than the standard CFAR platform is.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is very plain. You feel freer to propose things like $22 an hour for a living wage under the job guarantee, and very substantial increases to Social Security, also Medicare for all and free college, and the elimination of student debt, because you know that our monetarily sovereign government can pay for those things.
Right.
And CFAR hasn't incorporated yet the MMT foundations into its particular contract.
Right.
And I think so. That's a difference between you and some other CFAR candidates. Like, for example, Angelica Earl. Um, um,
I love
um,
Angelica. Yeah.
yeah, she seems like a fine candidate,
Oh, I love her. Yeah, she's great.
but uh, she is really very timid when it comes to the economic justice parts of the platform. Okay, I think that one reason that is actually Missouri, of course. I mean, it's obviously a very tricky state, okay, in which to run. Okay, but another reason for that is she doesn't seem to have a glimmer of understanding when it comes to MMT. So she doesn't know what is fiscally possible, and to a great extent, she buys into the neoliberal financing view, at least as far as I've seen her.
Hmm.
In, some of the videos that she's done. So the question for you is, as someone who likes her and is a potential colleague, okay, of hers, is
Yes. Yeah.
if you were elected to Congress and she were elected to Congress,
Hmm.
would she be voting on the same side as you if you proposed a federal jobs guarantee at $22 per hour?
Well, I
Given
will
her
tell
fiscal
you.
views.
Right. Well, I will tell you that we candidates have. I started a group with like a candidate chat going probably about 2 months ago. And so we candidates actually talk on the back end. I know it sounds kind of strange, but we have a Facebook chat on the back end where we kind of strategize and we kind of talk things out. And I don't know where Angelica stands on MMT. I don't know how proficient or not proficient that she might be in that theory. What I can tell you is Angelica has been one of my earliest supporters. She endorsed me when she was one of my first endorsements for my race. And she really has been an advocate for me, and I plan on being an advocate for her. As far as our issues go, I know that we have a good working relationship. Angelica and I have talked a few times outside of our group chat, even about ideas that we've had. And I know that she's willing to learn. I would say that. And I think most candidates who haven't grasped onto the concept of MMT, I think we're all willing to learn, especially those that are progressive, that are not establishment, that are facing those questions. Like you said, how are you going to pay for it? For $15 minimum wage, they're getting those questions. So I think we're all willing to learn. That's the biggest thing. We're willing to talk with each other, and so I definitely see myself partnering. Johnny Axon's a good example. I know you're fond of Johnny, and I'm very fond of Johnny too. Johnny and I have been talking about getting together and starting to get a group together to work on a federal jobs guarantee program. And so maybe we can bring Angelica into it, and her and Johnny and I can work together on it. I know Danielle St. John down south in San Diego is another candidate who's interested in MMT, that's been learning about it, that wants to see how she can incorporate it into her platform. Miguel Zuniga, Angelica Cardenas. There's a lot of candidates that are all running on very progressive platforms that are getting the same question. And you're correct. There are, for some of us, like Johnny and myself, it might be a little bit easier for us to answer it because we are beginning to see the theory in action. We're beginning to understand it. And so it's our job, I think, to pass that knowledge on to our fellow Congress people. It's our job to go to Angelica Earl's office in the Senate, which I hope she does have, and sit down and talk with her and hammer out a bicameral bill that's going to pass both houses. And I think Angelica would be a good advocate for that. I don't see why she wouldn't stand for that and try to work with us on it. She's definitely not a fan of the party. She's running against McCaskill, so they're already going to have a tough time winning that seat.
She's running against Claire McCaskill.
Yeah,
right. I would like nothing better than to see Claire McCaskill go down.
I think a lot of us would.
Yeah, she is really, really terrible.
She's number 2 on my list. I really want to see Joe Manchin go. I want to see Joe Manchin go so bad.
Yeah, so do I. But I also
Yeah.
want to see Nancy Pelosi go very,
Oh
very.
yeah, that would be great.
Okay, Peter Jacob. He's another CFAR signator
Uh-huh.
who is, at this point, basically in the tax and spend category.
Uh-huh.
He still doesn't understand, um, well, some of the basic things. In other words, MMT is an approach that deals with a lot of aspects, okay, of economics.
Right.
There's sectoral balances, there's trade policy, there's the job guarantee, there's the social security issue,
Right.
and whether Social Security is really going to run out of funds in 2033. So there are lots of different issues that are brought to the table, okay, by MMT.
Right.
But lots of stuff comes down to the basic understanding, which is in this very simple little thing, and that is that Congress has the constitutional authority to create currency, reserves, okay, and also the coins, which has been given to in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And that without constraints placed on the powers granted to Congress by the Congress itself, there is a situation of monetary sovereignty that exists. That's the situation the nation was born into when the Constitution was passed. It was born into monetary sovereignty. That was our legacy from the founders. They had some good legacies and some very bad legacies, obviously.
Right. Obviously.
This was a very good legacy that was handed to us by the founders.
Right.
And the point is, that legacy still fundamentally exists. That's what everybody has to understand. The only thing after that you have to understand is how are we going to exercise that legacy today?
Right.
And I say that this overt congressional financing, OCF, answer to the how you're going to pay for it question tells congressional candidates how to answer that question and what to do to implement the monetary sovereignty of the United States in the short run without making huge changes to our present institutional structure.
Right, absolutely.
While retaining the Fed and while retaining the Treasury Department actually pretty much in its present form, and while retaining the Congress pretty much in its present form. In other words, the change to realize monetary sovereignty fully, get past things like the debt ceiling crisis and the propaganda concerning the debt. The way to do that is just to include the boilerplate within the congressional bills that's provided. Sorry, I did the wrong thing here.
It's okay. I was like, whoa.
Okay, that's actually provided here. Okay, I give a more or less precise language that would be used in the boilerplate to all appropriations bills and CR bills here. That's more complicated, okay, than what I did in a simplified version, okay, to answer by the reporters. But I think something like this is the legal answer that Congress people would actually be writing into the bills,
Right.
okay, and passing. And so I think that's a very valuable thing for congressional candidates to know. Okay, now there's something else we teach K and MNP, which is very important, and that is, I'm sure you've heard of taxes do not fund spending now.
Yes, of course.
Okay, the reason why that is true actually has to do with the technical details of how the Federal Reserve operates to destroy money and also to create money, okay, in the form of the reserves. It destroys and then, essentially newly creates in the Treasury spending account. So that's a technical kind of explanation that is hard to use on the public. Okay, now you can say general things about it, and you can wave your hands. But when people really zero in and they ask for an explanation of why taxes cannot fund spending and why bond revenues cannot fund spending, you have to go back to Stephanie Kelton's paper and see how she explains it in terms of the mechanics of the way the Federal Reserve actually operates. And that's not something that people can so easily understand in a sentence or two.
Right.
So, the beauty of this language and the beauty of this simplified answer to the how you're going to pay for it question is that, basically you're explaining it by answering the how you're going to pay for it question in an obvious way and saying, we're going to use Congress's power to order the Federal Reserve to order them to place this money in the Treasury spending account. That's how we're going to pay for it. End of story.
Right.
And that doesn't need a lot of explanation. If they say, well, what about the debt? And you say, okay, well, look at this. Within 6 months' time, $4 trillion worth of debt's going to be gone. And eventually it's all going to be gone.
Right.
And that's how we're going to get rid of the debt. Not only pay for it, that's how we're going to get rid of debt, if that's what you're concerned about.
Right.
Okay? And you can tell them at the time, you can say, look, there's really no reason to be concerned about the debt. It's not really a financial problem for the United States. But if you think it is a problem, then you can be comfortable with this particular solution because it incidentally simply takes care of that. Why do we want to take care of it? Just because we want to get rid of the political problem of the debt, even though we don't believe it's a financial problem.
Right.
We know that it bothers you. We know that it's a political problem. So we're just going to wipe the slate clean so you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's an honest answer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an answer, okay, that works. I did want to say one more thing about campaign finance reform.
Yes.
And your plank on that. I'm for an amendment to the Constitution also.
Mm-hmm.
Amendments to the Constitution take 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes they take even longer. Sometimes, like the Equal Rights Amendment,
ERA, yeah.
They get lost. They reach 35 states and then they get lost. They can't make few states and pass this amendment, which is a relatively simple amendment. Well, first of all, with respect to campaign finance laws, we can't take that chance. With respect to campaign finance laws, we can't take the time.
No.
So we need something quicker.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, so what's quicker?
Well, I don't think at this point in time we have an option.
We do. We have an option. If we get the progressive Congress into office, which is what we'd have to do to pass a constitutional amendment anyway.
Right, of course.
Before we pass the constitutional amendment, we could pass new campaign finance laws. And we could include a boilerplate thing in those campaign finance laws. There's a clause in the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2. Article 3 is the article on the powers of the judiciary.
Judiciary, yeah.
It's the article that authorizes the Supreme Court and gives the Supreme Court and all the courts under it the authority to do what they do, including by implication, as the Supreme Court said and gathered this power into itself, the power to review the constitutionality of laws passed by the Congress.
Right.
So, what this clause does is, there's a phrase in it that's called the exceptions clause. And the exceptions clause gives Congress the power to define the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the particular legislation that is being passed. So Congress would be able to decide that the Supreme Court, which is completely an appellate court, it only can hear cases on appeal. Congress can determine whether it can hear cases relating to a particular law. It can just exclude the Supreme Court from having jurisdiction over the law with a simple phrase. You Supreme Court do not have jurisdiction over this. We're exercising Article 3, Section 2, as we have the authority to do.
Have laws been passed with this clause exercised before, and the Supreme Court respected that?
As far as I know, this has never been done, but the Supreme Court has little choice. It's written into the Constitution. There can be no other thing in this case other than a literal interpretation of the Constitution. The language is plain. It gives Congress the power to exclude the Supreme Court from hearing appeals on particular pieces of legislation passed by the Congress. It's just right there. It's just in a phrase. There's no other way to look at it.
Well, but if that were the case, I will have to reread that clause again. But if that's the case, so let's say that we are able to pass a stopgap measure of sorts until we can actually write into the Constitution an amendment that is going to protect against, basically that says corporations aren't people, we're moving to public financing, get over it sort of thing. If we were going to pass a stopgap measure, I'm okay with doing that, but we've tried that in the past before with McCain-Feingold, right? McCain-Feingold just got gutted recently. So what kind of bill would we be passing?
No, you repass McCain-Feingold or something even more comprehensive than it.
Right.
Includes McCain-Feingold, and then you put the exceptions clause in that. And the Supreme Court, is out of it at that point. Okay, and also, furthermore, if you put in a more general exceptions clause, saying that the Supreme Court is excluded from reviewing any bill on campaign finance, at all, then suddenly all the previous campaign finance laws are again good.
Right.
In other words, they become good simply because the Supreme Court cannot exert the authority it once had to hear appeals.
Right.
Based on the idea that the previous decision of the Supreme Court excludes the constitutionality of these laws.
Right.
The Supreme Court would not be able to decide that. It would be out of the game. That's it. Okay, now why did the framers put this into the Constitution? They put it into the Constitution because the Constitution was supposed to be a balance of different powers. Okay, the judiciary, or I should say the government of the United States, okay, the judiciary was supposed to be the aristocratic power in the Constitution.
Right.
The executive was supposed to be the monarchical power in the Constitution. The House of Representatives was supposed to be the democratic power in the Constitution, the very house that you're going to.
Right.
The Senate was another bastion, okay, of aristocratic power. So, I mean, the framers were inclined towards aristocracy.
Yeah, of course. They were all aristocrats, so of course they were.
Well, they weren't actually aristocrats in the British sense
Right.
of the term, but they had aspirations that way.
There
and they
you
had
go.
a favorable view towards aristocracy, at least in Jefferson's terms, okay, an aristocracy of talent.
Right.
So they had some idea, okay, of aristocracy. And the framers thought that the power of the people, as expressed in the House, had to be contained in various ways. So that's how they constructed the separation of powers
Right.
inside the federal government. But they also realized that all the powers had to be balanced against each other. And they realized the executive could run amok, okay, and become a tyrant. And so the Congress had the power of the purse to prevent this from happening.
Well, more specifically, the House has the power of the purse. So, but yes.
Well, the House had the power to originate the money bills.
There you go.
Okay, but of course, jointly with the Senate,
Right.
it had the power to pass money bills, not simply to originate them, but pass them. Okay, so, but the framers also recognized that the judiciary could run amok also.
Right.
That's why they put in the exceptions clause.
I see.
It's supposed to be what happens when a judiciary runs amok. Now, this judiciary has run amok. It took the election away from Al Gore in 2000. Okay, it refused to provide a path to the Democrats to contest other elections that were obviously rigged, okay,
Right.
obviously crooked. It has failed to defend the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
Okay, it's made this outrageous CU decision, obviously at complete variance with the intentions of the framers of the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution hated corporations.
Yes.
There's no way they thought of corporations as people. That is ridiculous.
Right.
On its face, from any reading of history, that is ridiculous. This is a judiciary that has run amok. It needs to be checked by the power of the people. The check is in the Constitution. Use it for God's sake.
Okay. Well, I definitely, I think another thing that has been brought up too is the idea of giving the judiciary term limits. I don't see any drawbacks to that. I mean, I don't know what kind of term limit we would need to look at, but I think someone mentioned 20 years term limit. After 20 years, the justices, 20 years or upon reaching the age of a certain age, they are no longer eligible to sit on the court. And that would kind of stop these entrenchments by both the liberal and democratic justices on the court that have been serving for decades. I know some of the justices have been serving longer than I've been alive. So I think that's something that we can definitely look at too. I think a constitutional amendment to Article 3 that says that justices will no longer serve for life, that they can serve for 20 years. I think that's a good start. I know some people are calling for 10. I think 20 is fair. Because I know that the intention was that there'd be a consistency throughout at least one of the branches, and that's why they put that lifetime, the service for a lifetime in there. I think that was a different time. I think we need to adjust, and I think people forget about the Constitution. The founding fathers did not intend it to be a dead document. That's why they included the amendment process. We haven't had a constitutional amendment longer than I've been alive. Again, there's no reason why we should not. I personally have about 10 amendments that I would like to see added. I would like to see the ERA, a revamped version of the ERA that says the government shall make no law based on sex, race, orientation, sexual identity, period, at gender identity, physical, mental disability, period. I'd love to see that be a constitutional amendment.
Okay.
Sorry, Jim, if you want to say something.
I am certainly for doing constitutional amendments.
Right.
I certainly think that those are something. There's some things we need to do
right
through the amendment process. Okay, I'm all for that. I'm all for considering more, and I'm all for passing more.
Right.
But again, the point I made before, it's a 7 to 10 year process.
Right.
We need something.
And I like your idea of using that if it is in the Constitution and it's able to be used that way. My question is twofold, though. Number one, the court is going to take that bill either way because the power is vested within them to interpret the Constitution. I need to see the language, and I believe you 100% that it's ironclad, plain as stone sort of language. I'm just worried that if we open that door, will we have
the program tonight? Can we get us the program tonight?
I'm sorry?
When we get finished with the program tonight, go to the Constitution, read the language for yourself.
I have one right here, and I will take a look at it. Yes, absolutely. But my worry, though, is if we use this language and the Republicans get wise to it, are they going to? I mean, I get what you're saying. This is language that should be used when a judiciary is out of control. But what we have witnessed the Republicans do time and time again is tear apart everything like a child throwing a tantrum when they wanted to get something done. My worry is that that language will become so commonplace in every bill that's passed before Congress as a way of safeguarding against a judiciary that it'll make the judiciary either irrelevant or impotent. And that's what I worry about. So I get what you're saying. I think that's a great idea. If that is the check that is intended to be used, we should use it. But I just worry, what are the other sides of that consequence? For example, the Democrats, when their Supreme Court vacancy was open, I would have pushed that nuclear button so quick and had Merrick Garland. I wouldn't have picked him, but I'm just saying, as an example, I would have hit that nuclear button so quick because we all knew the Republicans were going to do that. We all knew as soon as they got the Senate back, they were going to push him to the side, and they were going to nominate their own person, and they were going to hold that seat up. They told us they were going to do that. So my only worry is, what if we see these bills being passed? What if we see another Roe versus Wade overturned bill that says the Supreme Court doesn't have authority here and can't hear that case? What if we see a case that passes a religious freedom bill that says, gays and lesbians are legally allowed to be discriminated?
I have the answer to that.
Okay, great. Please tell me, Joe. Tell me.
I have the answer to that, and it's really the answer to that. Okay, the only answer to that is as follows. First, if you don't use Article 3, Section 2, sooner or later, they will. It starts to displease them. You can't stop that by refusing to use Article 3, Section 2 yourself. Right. Just like we couldn't stop their use of the nuclear option when they wanted to use the nuclear option.
Right.
So in other words, in 2009, when we failed to pass the Medicare for All bill because we wanted some Republican support or Blue Dog support, okay, we tried like hell to get the Republican support, didn't get it. but we got sufficient amount of blue dog support to eventually pass the ACA. Well, guess
Right.
what? We didn't need the blue dog support. We could have said, screw you, blue dogs, and passed the Medicare for All bill with a bare majority broken by the vice president.
Yep.
At that time, if we had gotten rid of the nuclear option,
Yeah.
uh, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus bill,
Yeah.
was less than $1 trillion when it should have been closer to $2 trillion.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It could have ended the recession within 6 months if it had been a bill of
Right.
that size with a job guarantee in the bill.
Yep.
Why wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Because the blue dogs and the Republicans were going to filibuster it. So again,
Yep.
there were few, I don't know, I forget if there were any Republican votes for that, but certainly there were blue dogs for that because the country was in a panic and
Right.
they wanted to stem the tide. But the point is that a $2 trillion bill would have passed the Congress at that time. Had Obama wanted to pass it,
Yeah.
if he would have
Absolutely.
were willing to pull the trigger on the nuclear option.
Well, and we see countless
It
examples of
wasn't,
that. We
it
continue
wasn't
to see.
even a case of pulling the trigger on the nuclear.
And
What
we see
Obama
countless
should
examples of
have,
the Democrats
what
doing that.
Obama should have done was to have asked Harry Reid to get rid of the filibuster on January 3rd of 2009 on grounds that he needed to get rid of the filibuster to pass his program. If not, the country was going to go down the tubes. We
Yeah.
were losing 700,000 jobs a month then.
Absolutely. And I mean, and we were talking a little bit about it earlier that we consistently see the Democrats have these lofty ambitions and goals that they run on, and then when it comes to actually implementing the policy, they always want consensus or compromise, or we want to make sure that we don't go too far. I have to say this: I am not a Republican by any means, but one thing I admire about the Republican Party, they say what they say is what they do. They're not afraid to pass laws and to continually push the boundaries, and they beat the Democrats every time. They have their head to the pavement every time. They're the ones who always make the victory laps on the bills that they've passed. And guess what? Their voters love it. They eat it up. Why are the Democrats not doing the same exact thing on the left, on the opposite side? We should have passed Medicare for all in 2009. If not 2009, then certainly, 2009, when we had a supermajority, 2010 early, when we had a supermajority with Al Franken's vote. We could have easily passed it and eliminated the nuclear option. They're always concerned about kowtowing and, let's compromise with the Republicans. Why? They're not trying to compromise with us.
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. But what they've really been doing is they've really just been trying to find a way to conciliate their corporate donors so they can keep the donations coming in.
Yeah.
And they're using bipartisanship as an excuse for that.
Right.
Okay. And
absolutely.
So that's what that whole scenario was about in 2009. Okay.
My favorite one too, Joe. My favorite one. Don't forget political capital. Don't forget political capital. How they'll talk about, we didn't have the political capital to do what we wanted to do. And it's like, you think Republicans are concerned about political capital? They don't give a shit about political capital.
Not only that, but guess what? Votes are political capital.
There you go.
Your votes to pass bills that are good for people, then your political capital grows. It doesn't stay stable. It grows.
Exactly.
If you want to grow your political capital, you got to give the people what they want.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's my answer to your question about Article 3, Section 2, and what happens if the Republicans use it. The answer to that is easy. see that the Republicans never get into office again.
There you go.
Just keep on passing bills that are good for the people, that work, that fulfill the public purpose, and the people will have no reason to vote for the Republicans, at least not these Republicans.
Right.
It will be like what happened uh, during the Depression, okay, and after the Depression, for the Republican Party to begin to get votes again. It had to change.
Right.
And the way it changed at first was with the modern Republicans, okay, and Dwight Eisenhower, who sounded very much like a Democrat in the 1930s,
Right.
okay, and who acted like one too. Of course, he never did fully change the Republican Party, so there was a reaction against his style, okay, of being a Republican by Barry Goldwater, which led to the
Right.
rightist trend, okay, in the Republican Party, okay, and we know that. But the point is, had we been vigilant about that and continued to follow New Deal policies right down the line,
Yes, sir.
there would have been no reaction.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing too. We look at it with what happened with Clinton, right? Clinton came into office already kind of in an ugly, not ugly, but a kind of a three-way race there where he didn't really have political capital or a mandate. And he went the centrist route. He passed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He did the centrist bullshit that, and I'm sorry to use that language, but quite frankly, people didn't vote for you to be a centrist. They voted for you to do what you said you were going to do. And the problem with our country has become that people would be happier retaining power than doing what is right. And you'll find there's a lot of candidates like myself that we didn't want to run. We started running because we realized y'all are the same kind of people that we've always had. You're going to get to Washington and you're going to do this, whatever the party tells you to do. And every year you're going to hope that you retain your seat and you make your way up. I've already pledged that I would only do 3 terms. I believe in term limits personally. We have them in California. They work fine for us. And so I'm going to go serve 3 terms if I'm able to secure election. And then I'm going to come home and go back to my life. But you better believe in that 6 years that I'm going to pass every piece of legislation or vote for every piece of legislation that, it, like you said, advances the agenda of doing what's good for the people, because I don't want to go there. So, and I think we've got too many people that have made that their life's goal. And that was not the goal of our founding fathers. That was not their intention, that people be career legislators. They envisioned citizen legislators that went and took care of business and passed bills and then served a couple years and then went home to their farms because they couldn't afford to not go back to their farms. And now we have people serving 40 years, again, longer than I've been alive. Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, they've been in Congress longer than I've been alive. And we've come to the point now where people care more about retaining power than they care about those who entrusted them with it. And that's a dangerous place to be in, I think.
Yes, I agree. Okay, and I think it's a dangerous place to be, but I'm not for term limits.
Okay.
Why I've never been for term limits, okay, is that I think that Congress people need to be responsive to the will of the people.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is a good congressperson, okay, or a good senator who's legislating for the public purpose and has that kind of a record, then they should be able to serve for as long as people are willing to return them to office. In the
Sure.
case of the House members,
Right.
you stand for every 2 years.
Right.
So you're constantly before the people. If you eliminate the influence of money in politics, you just get it out, okay, as much as possible, okay, and go to public financing
Yes.
of campaigns and take away the barriers for others to come into the process, okay, and actually challenge you, so that you always have to run on your records and you set up
Yes. Absolutely.
circumstances in that way then there's no need for term limits. In
That
other
makes
words,
sense. I agree.
if there were term limits, where would Bernie Sanders be today?
That is true.
In other words, you literally would not have a Bernie Sanders. You
Right.
would not have some of the greatest senators we've had in the history of the United States if there were term limits. So, I
Your
mean, I
logic,
really don't
I'm
believe
not disagreeing with your
further.
logic. That's sound logic, yes.
What I believe in the end is that we're supposed to be about a democracy. We're supposed to be about the people's will being reflected in terms of the issues we care about, the policies that we enact, and the people who are willing to serve us in this way. And I don't trust really limitations on democracy, except for the most fundamental ones that would overturn the capability to change representatives or change governments. Okay.
Right.
So, in other words, I am opposed to limitations on free speech. I'm very absolutist when it comes to free speech and free press.
Right.
But when I say free press, okay, and I'm absolutist concerning that, that doesn't mean I'm for protecting the monopolies and near monopolies that pretend to be the free press today.
Yeah.
No idea of a free press,
Right.
but a corporate media controlled by a few extremely large corporations that until recently had nothing to do with the press.
Right.
Amazon buying the Washington Post. Are you kidding me? And the Washington Post claiming the protections of the First Amendment? I mean, that's bullshit. Okay? That sort of thing should not happen.
No, it shouldn't.
I mean, the only reason why it was allowed to happen was because of a bribed and corrupt Congress and executive branch that would not enforce the antitrust laws.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking too. And I actually got that question last night. Someone asked me how I felt about the antitrust, and I said there's a few industries that we need to begin to break up. Banking, banking needs to be broken up. Media needs to be broken up. I mean, there's a few different companies. Oil needs to be broken up. I mean, there's a lot of monopolies that we have going on. And you're absolutely right, Joe, that the current Congress is incentivized to keep it that way. And the sooner we get money out of politics to where it is, I personally like the idea of also shortening the election season. I like what France does. France has a law, I think it's 3 months before the election date. And if you start campaigning or you run an ad, before midnight or 12:01 on the third month, or you know what I'm trying to say, what they'll do is they'll fine you. And I think that's what we need to look at the U.S. Again, I entered this race on January 3rd, 2018. I thought I was entering early, and then I hear about the other candidates that have been running since last April. You mean you're going to run for a year and a half to go to Congress? You're not concerned about the people. If you were, you wouldn't be entering the race unless you felt you had to. And that's what kind of makes me different from the rest of them. And so it's interesting to see these candidates foaming at the mouth to take out Devin Nunes, and they don't have any logical plan. They don't have any ideas. The math is not there in our district. We went 70-30 Republican last time. People are mad at Devin Nunes, but they're not that mad. You're not gonna pull off a 20-point swing plus 1%. Assuming that you can. It's just not, the math isn't there. And so, I mean, and that's unfortunately what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of candidates, especially in the Democratic Party, that are running right now and that are just bereft of any intelligence or any passion for what they're doing. They're doing it because of the passion that they have for their own advancement. I had one of my fellow candidates, he got asked about education at one of his town halls, and my staff and I were there. We went to his town hall because it was, an event and we had time. So I said, let's go watch him. And he said in front of the audience, well, me and my wife have a lot of school loans, and thankfully mine are forgiven because I'm a public servant, because he's a district attorney. So I'm a public servant, so mine are forgiven. And the question was, are you for college education for all? And his response was, well, my loans are forgiven. So I'd like to see that expanded to where basically saying where people like me are okay to go ahead and get a cutback and go, we're okay to get our free college, but the rest of you, no, I'm not going to go that far. But me though, me and mine are good. And he literally said this, and everyone clapped. And I'm like, did you not hear what he said? He literally said, I like that I get my college for free because I'm a public servant. So I think it's good that I get free stuff. But the rest of you do not know. We're not going to go that far. And they clapped for him. And I'm like, and that's what government has become. That's what representatives have become. So money in politics should be the focus of everyone's attention. And there are Republicans that hate it too. I know there are Republicans that don't like it. Samuel Ronan in Ohio is not a fan of money in politics. There's a couple other one. I think Ileana Rios Latham, I want to say, in Florida, she's not a big fan of it from what I've seen from interviews she's done. They sit in a room and call about money 70% of the time. Think about the amount of bills that we could write that would be good. Think about the teamwork that we could have by sitting down and talking and hammering out the details and convincing our colleagues to do what is right if we weren't spending 70% on the phone calling people asking them for money. It's ridiculous. It's become a joke. And what's funny is the corporations, to them, it's not a joke. To them, they're winning. It's a game and they're winning. So, sorry, I get passionate sometimes.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, him. I get real passionate too. Yeah. Okay, so it's now 11:18, and we've been on for 2 hours, and 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And my people here, at RP, are constantly telling me that I've really got to get my streams down, to under.
Okay.
But I never like to cut short a discussion that's a really good one where people are, rolling along.
Sure.
And changing views. And I'm not really too much of a marketer. And I mean, I care more about the discussion. In the exchange of views. And considering how long we've been on, we've been hanging in here pretty well with, the viewers, who are with us.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten a really large amount of people watching, at any one time tonight. And
right.
There are a variety of reasons, but we've had a very faithful group.
Yes, we have. I noticed too.
Up with us at a particular size for the second hour. And so we know they're getting something out of this.
Right.
And that is, is really enough for me, at this point. But I do have to get off, because but my lovely wife of 51 years is pointing out to me.
Time to wrap it up. Well, thank you so much for having me, Joe. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for the good feedback. And I like having conversations where someone tells me, you're right, but I don't agree with this, and here's why. I like those conversations because it allows me to rethink my strategy and rethink my formula and challenges my own perceptions about things. And so thank you for facilitating that dialogue with me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, if you have the time, I'd like you to come back again.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But before the election, so we can go, a little more deeply into some of these issues.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I want to be on with Grumby too. I told Grumby I want to be on with him. If I did a good job, maybe he'll watch this and he'll say that I can be on with him too.
Maybe he'd enjoy that. I don't know, but he might want you to call him something different from Grumby.
I keep calling him grumpy and he hasn't stopped me yet. So I asked him when I was like, did he hate that? And they're like, I don't think so, because he would have told you that he hated it if he didn't like it. And I was like, okay, cool. So, but thank you so much, Joe. I do appreciate it. I'm gonna go eat some dinner and I'll see you again soon, okay?
Okay, thank you, Jaden.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Fun. Okay. Okay, so everybody, thank you for coming. Okay, it is my time to wrap it up. We won't have time for a Q&A tonight. I hope you enjoyed the session that we had. I think we got into some very, very interesting discussions here. And yeah, I would like to have JM back on. He's really a very competent guy. He thinks carefully about things, and he'd be a really good person to have in Congress. We didn't get a chance to talk about. He talked about how the winning candidate, other than the Republican, would have to get something like a 21-point shift, an overall shift, of 21 points. So it would be really a tall order to win, the district, because people are not really that mad at the incumbent, Mr. Nunes. But one thing JM might consider is that maybe with the right program that we can have, because we have our monetary sovereignty, that he can get people mad enough at the incumbent, at Mr. Nunes, to get that shift that's needed to get into office. I know it's a tall order. I know it's very far-fetched. Okay, I know he doesn't have any money. I know all these things about the situation. But the real thing you have to do is show the voters what could be done and how they've been getting screwed by the old regime. You've got to show them that. And if you succeed in showing them that, then all things are possible. Even the kind of shift that the JM is talking about. Even that is possible. If you get enough people angry enough and enough people educated enough about what they could have if they only voted right. So on that note, I'm going to say goodnight to all, and I'm going to end our broadcast. Thank you very much for coming.